Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining Expert Views on Global Policy. Today we are discussing Africa, the world's second largest continent, which spans its constraining landscapes from the Sahara sands to the Congo's rainforests. This cradle of civilization boasts ancient empires like Mali and Ethiopia, living legacies of art and knowledge. Culturally, Africa is a vibrant tapestry. Over 2,000 languages are spoken, and music, dance, storytelling, and visual arts paint a rich picture. From indigenous faiths to Christianity and Islam, religions wave through daily life. Colonization reshaped Africa, but independence movement rose it in the 20th century. Today, Africa is a continent on the rise, experiencing economic growth despite challenges like poverty. Today, we have a pleasure to host two representatives of African continent, Vasa and Odinga. Thank you very much for being with us today. And may I please ask you to briefly present yourself and talk a bit about your career path. Let's start from you, Vasa.
Thank you for having us in this. We really hope it's going to be a very entertaining discussion. My name is Wassa Sise. I'm from Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, in West Africa. I work in climate finance, so work with development agencies and impact investment funds to support businesses across sub-Saharan Africa.
I don't have such a wonderful description of myself or introduction, but my name is Josan Oginga. I'm from Kenya. I have a little bit of background in manufacturing. I did my undergrad about agriculture and economics, and now after Schwarzman, hopefully I'm going to do data science at Georgetown. I love entrepreneurship, I love development, and you'll hear me mention it a lot. I love manufacturing as a whole.
Great, thank you. My first question is addressed to you, Oginga.
Okay.
Let's start from policy and development.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what is the single most important policy change which is needed to accelerate economic growth of Africa?
That's a good question, and perhaps you might give me a wiggle room to maybe do two that are kind of complementary. So one of the things that is very important for African countries to have is called industrial policy. So most African countries do not have industrial policy, or if they do, there's lack of implementation of these policies. So having a clear industrial policy that kind of gears the country towards industrialization would be very helpful. And to supplement that policy, I would say private property rights. So one of the difficulties that foreign direct investors, when they come to the continent, they find it very challenging that there's no clarity on private property rights. And so when someone is going to put their money in any kind of investment, they want safety and security for both themselves and their property, and they know that they can recoup their property at any point during their investment. So having that institutional framework to support private property rights, but also create an industrial policy that is encouraging people to invest in that country can be a clear way to head towards development.
Right.
Yes.
Right. What do you think, Vasa?
I think we're kind of aligned because I think one of those the most important policies that's important for most African countries will be free trade agreements that are not only based on raw material export. So I think industries and transformation on the ground is what will add value creation, create job, and make it sustainable. So definitely industries, but in a trade agreement, bigger scope that goes more both ways than just solely as raw material exporting into the world and receiving the finished product. So I think it needs to be a bit more equal in terms of value creation. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for sharing this. In modern development, one of the most important aspects is technology. I'm wondering what are the biggest challenges and opportunities associated with the rapid technological development taking place across Africa? Let's start with you.
Oh, okay. I was hoping she goes now. Okay. So I mean, there's a lot of technological advancement that's happening at the global stage, right? And also in African countries, there's a lot of innovation coming out because, okay, here's something that most people don't know. mobile money transfer, the first place it was done was in Kenya, which is in Africa, right?
With
And now it's
Safaricom.
with Safaricom through M-Pesa. But now if you look at China, they've scaled it so much that you can literally pay for everything using your WeChat or Alipay. So there's a lot of innovation that is coming out of the continent. So there's a lot of opportunities to nurture those talents. And also, most African countries will have to leapfrog some element of technological advancement. So for instance, most African countries don't have the telephone poles or connections because by the time they were getting to that level, mobile phones were already out. So for them, they need to focus on the cell towers to kind of distribute the communication. Now, in terms of today and moving into the future, there's need for talent to develop, and there's also need for resources to be invested so that once you have that talent, they can leverage it to do amazing things. M-Pesa is just one example. African countries are doing a lot in fintech, including when we go to Nigeria next week, we're going to meet some of the fintech industries there. So there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of opportunities. We just need to nurture the talent and give them the resources to leverage those talent to solve global problems and also African problems as well. Yeah, I'm not sure what you think.
No,
also.
I kind of agree.
Yeah.
I think what you were talking about is directly related to my another question, which is, what do you think, Basa? As African cities continue to grow, what infrastructure investments are most critical to ensure sustainable development?
That's definitely linked, because when Oginga was speaking, one of the things that came to my mind is like something that we definitely need as infrastructure to support this investment in everything that will be linked to energy. Because if you take most of the new technologies, even if you take not only fintech, not only financial technology, then you take AI, you take cloud computing and all of that, we need a lot of servers to be able to host them. Like for us to be able to have access to all the new technologies, we need energy. And energy in Africa is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. How do we create sustainable energy? How do we store it? How do we make it accessible and affordable? So infrastructure investment should go toward creating renewable energy, tapping into solar, wind energy, hydropower, geothermal. Yes, nuclear, why not? I know Ghana is one of the ones pioneering that work. There's a lot of students here at Shingwa that come from Ghana that are just studying that. So I think investment in making sure that we have access to energy that would then leapfrog into supporting all of this is one. And then two, just in general, capacity building. I think it's really important to develop local talent, because the solution might be happening elsewhere, but like the context in Africa is a bit different, right? So it's very important to understand every country in which you're going to invest and how the people will react to that technology advancement and then adapt their strategy to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you mentioned many students here at Tsinghua from African countries, and we all know about the importance of relations between Africa and China. I'm curious, what is the role of China's Belt and Road Initiative in infrastructure development in Africa?
Oh. Do you want me to
No,
start?
you should.
I'm happy to start on that one.
Okay,
So
let's start.
I have been very fortunate to live and work in 12 African countries in total.
Wow.
And you will find China everywhere. That's at least a common thing you will find. But the role that China is playing in these different countries is a bit different. So in Kenya, it's a lot of infrastructure. One of the biggest projects of the continent, the SGR railway that links Nairobi to Mombasa, which are two big cities, has been done by China. You have other investment program infrastructure, one in Ethiopia, in Cote d'Ivoire, my own country. It's mostly road and all of that. So there is a big history between China and developing countries, especially in the Sub-Saharan Africa region, that are supporting everything from infrastructure, from development in general. Now, how is that relationship growing today is a bit different, because I think these countries have also have like a legacy of having this type of relationship with the United States, with the European Union, etc., etc. And it was mostly linked on governance. So they will support countries that have the same governance system as them. So democracy was a big part of it, making sure that the system is aligned with the values of the country investing. While China doesn't really care about the governance system you're having, they care about the project that you're ready to develop, the part of the market that will go to the Chinese bidders, so how many Chinese companies will be able to work on that project, but also how they will be able to develop the same project massively in other places. Because the Chinese market is kind of saturated, so the companies here need to expand to places that need those resources. So that's definitely where Belt and Road has been moving so far. And I think the sentiment of African toward China is not as negative as it's being portrayed, which is the biggest discussion I'm having since I've been in China, because the narrative is like, oh, it's neocolonialism, oh, everybody's being exploited, oh, it's China this bad, etc. And on the ground, the thought is, well, everybody else has been doing that. Why are you so mad that China is doing it too? So I think it's a very interesting dynamic, and it's not only Belt and Road. There's a lot of diplomatic relationship that goes beyond BIR.
Interesting. What do you think of it?
I think just to pivot of that, she has made very valid points of China's investment, not just through BRI, but like even the China Africa Fund and things like that. So China, the reason people seem to bring a lot of question about Chinese development is because of the scale and the magnitude they've done it within a very short period of time. Today, if we look at, let's say, Western aid or international institutional aid to Africa, most of them is not very infrastructural. It's focusing on like education, which is amazing. But at the same time, you know, people don't see education.
It takes too long.
Yeah, it takes too long for you to see the direct impact of it. But if you build a bridge, I can now go to the market, you understand? So that has like immediate impact, and people can physically go and touch and say, okay, I'm touching the bridge that was built by China. But hey, I can't touch the education that was funded by the US, right? So that is the reason why people are so concerned seeing these massive roads, and it's legitimate because something like this have happened before. The railway line that China is building from Mombasa to Nairobi, that already is in operation, right? The British did the same. They built a railway from Mombasa all the way to Uganda, which was meant to extract resources and also transport British troops along that line. So we have seen a similar character before. It is fair for them to be concerned about it. At the same time, this kind of development are actually having a good impact, a positive impact on the economy. And things like infrastructure are very expensive, right? And so the initial investment is going to be costlier. Most African countries do not have the capital to do that at the moment. So if they have a global partner, I don't think they necessarily care who the global partner is, as long as that global partner is helping them achieve their goal and mandate of economic development. So far, there's debt trap diplomacy that is being argued, but Chinese debt to Africa is less than 25%.
Compared to the rest, yes.
Compared to the rest. So I'm not sure who is trapping the other, but in general, the Belt and Road Initiative has had a positive impact, I would say. Yeah, it has a very positive impression as well on African people. Yeah.
So BRI has positive impact, but what about different free trade agreements which are in Africa? How do you estimate the role of connection between African countries itself? And Teresa, if you could talk a bit about UN's role. How do you see, is it really doing a great job there, or you would like UN to have more projects in African countries?
That's a very tough question, right? So there's probably three elements that I can think of. So right now, Africa as a whole has been trying to develop the African Free Trade Agreement for some time. So now everybody has signed it, finally. But implementation is taking quite some time. And the role of that AFTA is it's supposed to support African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So the role of that agreement is supposed to allow free movement of people and goods within the African continent, so that it's easier, because right now it's divided in different blocks. So you have ECOWAS for East Africa, you have the East African Association, EAC Community, East African Community for East Africa, you have the SADC for the South, etc., etc. And each one of them work as different economic blocks. So right now, what this agreement is trying to do is that these blocks can now interact with each other and then make the people move easily. Because as a West African, I can move to all West African countries, without thinking about it. As an East African, you can do that for some of East African countries without thinking about it. Southern African also have their own rules. So really, what we hope of that agreement, once it's finally fully implemented, is that you can move people and you can move goods and increase trade within the continent. But then free trade agreement outside the continent are very different, because then they're very individual targeted, because every country has their own agreement, which might not be beneficial for the region. So every country is, I don't want to say selfish, but it's very, personally oriented. And that's where biases come, because then the deal that the US will have with Ivory Coast will be different from the deal it's going to have with Mali. Those two countries are neighbors. So job creation, the amount of money that comes, the terms of the contract are different. One of the reasons why, actually it's to link even to the previous question, one of the reasons why African governments are so interested in getting more capital from China is because of the restriction that they've started receiving from other institutions and receiving money. Example, one of the biggest donors on the African continent were IFC or the World Bank, IMF that provide capital for infrastructure development. But lately, those capital came with terms that African continents cannot follow. You're required to make sustainable investments, so you use green energy, create this amount of job, etc., etc. But for developing countries, just doing that requires more funding. So who is creating that? Who is giving that money? So you create like an egg and chicken issue in the sense that you don't have the money to do what is required for you to have access to more money.
Yes.
And you have China that's like, yeah, I'm just going to give you money just for a higher rate. And in that case, people are willing to take that bet because at least they have access to capital. So I think free trade agreements with the rest of the world are just diminishing in terms of magnitude just because of the restriction that comes with them, and then the very aching and urgent need that the African government needs now to finally reach development, because we've been waiting for quite some time now, and I think it's our time.
Economic development is really important. So the aim, one of the main aims of these free trade agreements, also China's policy in Africa and many other countries' policy in Africa, is to gain these economic benefits. But I have somehow related question. How do you think, Oginga, how can African countries balance economic development with the need to protect their valuable natural resources and ecosystems?
I think, that's a good question, and perhaps you can also go from some of the answers that Wasa gave to the previous question. Ideally, in the world of international trade, right? So people specialize on what they're good at, and so China is doing great at manufacturing, so that's why China is really good being at the global manufacturing base that essentially supplies everything, right? And now, right now at the moment, most African countries are like the global supplier of raw materials, which has been the case for the past 150 or 200 years, and that ought to change. So this need, go back to the beginning of the interview, there's need for African countries to kind of reorient themselves to be more manufacturing, so that they can add value to their raw materials before it leaves the African continent, right? And then when you're trying to pursue this, but the idea is to move up the value chain. That is when you are going to both achieve the economic development and also protect your resources. Because now at the moment, you extract the resource, and before you add any value, you're giving it away to someone else who's going to add the value. So the only way you can balance because for industrial trade, you have to be contributing at something, right? If I'm exporting copper, for instance, I can add value, I can move one or two steps up the value chain and say, instead of selling the just raw copper, how about I process it and make, even if I don't make the copper cables, but I make the copper, the material that I need before I make the cables, right? And in that way, if I was going to get $1 for just the raw copper, now I can make 5. So when I make more money, then I get more incentive and more resources to move again up the value chain. And in turn, I'm going to protect my resources that are not going to be exploited in that case. And talking just a little bit about the free trade agreement, one of the values of BRI, because one of the biggest hurdles in doing business in Africa is infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's very expensive to move goods within the continent, because most of these countries, they are colonies, and they are designed to extract goods out of the continent.
Yeah.
So you'll find roads or railways that were built from cities, and then it heads out. It's not connected this city to another internal city, no. It was connected the city to the coast. And you find even weird railways, like America is building a railway right now from Rwanda in southern Africa into Congo, and then it ends into the middle of the Congo. Why? Because it is meant to extract resources. That's where they need it, right? So the infrastructure that is going to link these countries, then will make that we can add value to it. We say if you have a product in Kenya and is needed in Nigeria, you just need to ship it by road or by rail. But right now, it has either to fly or go down through the Cape of Good Hope or go up through the Suez Canal, which is more costly.
Yeah.
So it is cheaper for Kenya to do business with, let's say, Saudi Arabia or the Middle East or India than to ship it to Nigeria. So in a way, for us to add value, we have to find partners who can invest in infrastructure, or we can work with through public-private partnership to build infrastructure, put relevant policies at play, and then try to move up the value chain. So then we both grow economically and also protect our resources as well.
Can I add one point on
Sure.
the
Yeah,
resources one? So that was a really good example about the price of how do you add value? Because like a good example is like, let's say country A needs $100, right? And then if you only if you're an economy like African economies, that means you only have raw material, and raw material will be sold for $1, right? So it's gonna take you 100 different raw material for you to finally get to what you need. While if you transform it, you can sell it for $20. You only need 5.
Five of them.
You need
Yes.
5, and then that's it. So you get to conserve, preserve, replate, renew the resources that you already have. They don't run out as quickly. Better management, better structure, better value addition, and you get to fix so many other problems on the long, like in that process. Job creation, gender equality, zero hunger, good healthcare,
Poverty alleviation.
poverty alleviation, electricity and access to energy, access to clean water. There's so many different elements that comes from just increasing the value of the product that you're selling. In African countries, are really known for the raw material they have. Each one has something that's super valued outside of the world, but then the final product itself, it's valued like it's just crazy the amount that's being put there. Ivory Coast is the world's first producer of cocoa, but that's used to make chocolate. From the biggest brand, the Mondelez, the Lindt, and all of that. But the kg of cocoa, like raw cocoa in Ivory Coast, is $2, like at the farm, and you buy like 150 grams of a tablet of chocolate for $2. Can you imagine how much you make it in 1 kg? It's just crazy.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
So you mentioned a couple of problems, but I'm wondering how can African nations assert their interests more effectively on the global stage?
That's something that we all wonder. I think a first step would be to first be in the rooms where the things are discussed. So make sure that there's representation in the rooms. I think there's a lot of experts on the African market in general, but very few of them lived there or have the same stake as us, because we don't have other alternative. You have to be African, you have to be from that country. So it's either you make it work or you don't, So I think being able to be in the room when the discussion is happening is something that we definitely need to do. And then second, we need to be adamant and vocal. Very vocal about the things that we definitely need. We need, one of the things that we definitely need is more financial activity freedom, So while you're on the continent, if you can't migrate to someone else, how do you invest in other markets? How do you increase the revenue that you have as an individual? As countries, how do you have access to bigger partners that are not linked to geopolitical ties? How do you make sure that you even you yourself, as an African country, how do you make you need to invest in research? How do you make research to think about the different segments you have to focus on, and then how do you attract money? How do you make plans for the long term? Those are things that we definitely need to be doing that we're not doing enough for. I think something that we do a lot right now is very short-sighted. And it's sometimes linked to the structure of our government. Unfortunately, we have very short government in the African sense. Very few are very long. Very few. Uganda, Cameroon.
We have the long ones.
Yes.
They're very short-sighted in terms of their ambitions or implementation.
Yeah, so they make plan for 3 years, 5 years, just for the term of presidency. While something that I do admire here, that I didn't even admire before, like in China, is how long the reign of the president is. They can make 20 years plan, which sounds short, but in my country, you can't, because the president is there for 5 years. And when he leaves, every new president wants to create a new plan. So the continuity and the legacy of creating something that will help the people and that will actually boost the country is not there. So I think it's very important for leadership to think long, and then to put in place structures and processes that would allow this forward thinking to actually see through. Yeah.
Right. What do you think, Oyenga? What is something what African nations can do to raise their voices on the global stage?
She gave a very broken down answer, so it was amazing. So I'm not sure if I can top it. But one thing that I would like to point out is that most African countries, if you're thinking of accessing Chinese market, you get access to 1.4 billion people. If you think of accessing Indian market, you get access to another 1.4 billion people, right? But these are people within the same institutional framework. So if you decide to invest in China, you have to deal with one Chinese government. If you decide to invest in India, same case. If you come to Africa, you want to invest in 1.2 billion people, you're going to deal with 55 different government jurisdictions, regulations, and policies, right? So one of the hopes of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement was try to harmonize it so that it's easier that if you have access to one country, then essentially opens your market to 1.4 billion people, right?
So we say the same thing even.
Exactly. So in the context of the African Union, it has not done excellently well in trying to bring this economic voice together. I mean, they got a seat at the G20 right now, but I'm not sure how much. We just got in like I think last year, and so there's still a lot of opportunities for us to figure out how we can raise our voices there. But one fundamental factor is how can we leverage the African Union or the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to kind of harmonize the ease of doing business. Because then, if you have 1.4 billion people market, you can negotiate. But then now, if you go to a country with 10 million people, you have to pay for this permit, pay for the regulations, and it's not harmonized. It's very difficult to set up a business in an average African country. You understand? The exceptions are like Mauritius or Rwanda. Yeah, but it's very, very difficult on average to set up a business in African countries. In fact, it's very difficult for even Africans to travel within Africa than it is for them to travel outside Africa. You understand? So that makes it even crazier. So fundamentally, we need to kind of approach it together, because if we are together as 1.4 billion people, it's easier to negotiate. We have a bargaining chip. We are like, hey, we are making a free trade agreement with you. This is what we are asking for. We're giving access to 1.4 billion, 1.2 billion people with a potential to grow over the next decades. I think it's the only continent that has a population that is growing.
Yeah, everybody
right?
else is going down.
Exactly. So then, how can we leverage that to our? It's an asset. We can get the demographic dividend from it. We can negotiate for it during trade agreements, right? We have natural resources. If you have a permit to do mining, let's say in Liberia, then that should give you an access to mining in, like, let's say Cote d'Ivoire. But then we can agree, if Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire knows that they have access to this mineral, when we negotiate, we say the interests of Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire are harmonized, right? So that once you get your license, it's easier for you to do business. But the cost of doing business is so high that it makes it very unattractive. And even when you negotiate with people, they're like, oh, you're only giving me access to 10 million people, what do you want me to offer you, right? India doesn't offer the same thing, or China. They offer like an amazing access to a big market, and you know you're dealing with one government, and then once you're done with it and meet the requirements, you're open for business. So I think that we have an opportunity in that front. Yeah.
Common voice is definitely needed.
Yeah.
Because if I think about even the UN summit and meeting and all of that, like, so even if it's not only trade, any other topic, when you talk about it as one small country, it just does not make sense. People can't relate, they don't understand the scope of it until you talk about it with numbers. And the only way to have numbers is for all the countries to come with one single voice when they get to global spaces. Because otherwise they have contradicting messages. Somebody wants to focus on sustainability, somebody else is like, yeah, no, I just want to keep using fossil fuel. So you need to find an agreement internally so that when you go out, you have credibility, and then you can stand on your ground, and you all know that you cannot be shaken because you have, as you said, the volume behind and things to back you up, which often as an individual you can't do. So I think aligning voices is definitely what is needed on the public landscape. Yeah.
We can learn something from ASEAN,
Oh yeah.
international countries. Yeah.
ASEAN is really good with that.
Yeah.
Small countries that came together.
Yeah, you guys mentioned both challenges and opportunities, and also you offered some directions how to improve the situation in Africa, right? But to conclude, I'm curious, how do you perceive the role of Africa on the global stage in 10 or 15 years perspective? In which direction do you think that the continent will develop? And what is your one wish for your countries?
I'll let you start.
Yes.
So, okay, so I think last week the IMF just released a report that projects that in the next 10 years or so, African countries, the GDP growth rate is going to be the highest in the world. But so which is larger than in Southeast Asia or Asian countries or even Latin America. But sometimes statistics can be misleading. Having a growth rate that remains so fast is because maybe if you're coming from 1 to 2, that's a 100% growth rate. But if you're coming from 10 to 11, it's still the amount, the unit is the same. It's one unit, but the percentage growth at 10 to 11 is very small. So that can be misleading. But essentially, these statistics kind of provides hope that most African countries are headed towards, on average, they're heading towards the right direction in terms of growth and development. Now, there are existing challenges. Like right now, there's a very widespread anti-French sentiment in West Africa, and that has already caused like a lot of regime changes. I think about 7 coups in the past three or so years.
Yeah.
And so this kind of political instability is both not good for the region, but also makes the region less attractive for businesses and investors. So there's ongoing conflict in Sudan. Somalia is unstable. Congo has a crisis. Same to Chad. Same to Central African Republic. Same to South Sudan. So I can name just so much countries that are already going under conflict, right? So in the next 10 or 15 years, I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm very hopeful that IMS is projected that on average we are heading towards the right direction, but it is also fair to acknowledge that there are some African countries that I do not think are heading towards the right direction. And perhaps if their leadership does not take mechanisms to kind of take back control of what's happening, there's not so much hope as IMF put it out there. Yeah.
Well, I'm really happy that
hope
Oginga
that you are more optimistic.
I was about to say, I'm really happy Oginga was so pessimistic because I'm very hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful about what the future holds for the African continent. I want to be hopeful because I have to be hopeful. In the next 10 years, I want to believe that Africa is going to be one of the biggest markets for investment. I think business-wise, all the other markets are saturated. I think there's space for growth and opportunities for growth in the African continent. So investment from American startups, from European businesses, from Asian technologies. I think all of them will find themselves on the African market, which will boost those growth and job creation. I also want to think about the workforce that will be available because there's more and more young people that are trained, more and more people that are being educated, that are getting the right skills. So I think about the diversity even of thought that's going to happen. So I'm very hopeful about that. I'm also very hopeful that the political situation will settle down in all these places because I think it looked like a second wave of decolonization and independence because they are all experiencing it, what it means to now not have such a tight relationship with old colonies like the French one. So I think after 3-5 years, they'll now understand what it means to rule a country and what is needed, and that will probably bring that level of peace, hopefully. So again, very hopeful about learning from the past to build the future. Yes. I also think that policy-wise, at least, African countries are joining debates more and more. There's more representation from young people, from leaders, from thought leaders, from think tank, a lot of resources finally that are targeting that region. There's a lot of different opportunities between Middle East and Africa in general, between EU and Africa. So I really foresee a future where it will be very hard to disregard the importance of that place. Now, what sectors will be the most vibrant is what we're still debating, but I'm very hopeful about the next 10 years.
Right. Thank you so much. I believe it was a truly insightful talk. Thank you for sharing with expert views on global policy, and I wholeheartedly wish your countries and Africa in general the rapid development in terms of economy and also to perceive this tradition, this tapestry of languages, music, etc. One more time, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.